Hello and welcome to Cioindex's series on the emerging role of the CIO. My name is Saurabh Hajela and I'm your moderator for today's webinar. This webinar presents the key findings of the global Harvey Nash KPMG CIO Survey. Now, in its 20th year, the CIO Survey is the world's largest study of technology leadership and digital business strategies. The survey represents the views of almost 4,000 technology leaders from across 80 countries around the globe, with a combined IT budget in excess of $250 billion. The topics that we aim to cover today are: what are the board's priorities for IT? Where are organizations investing in IT? How the role of the CIO/the technology leader evolving? The key challenges facing IT leaders, including making digital a success. The webinar will last for about an hour, during which we'll be presenting 2 poll questions to you, and the results will be discussed during the presentation. The presentation will be followed by a Q&A session. I want to thank all of those who have already sent us their questions, and anybody who's not had the opportunity to, please send them to support@cioindex.com. Our presenters today are Robert Grimsey and Derek Kay. As the Group Marketing Director for Harvey Nash, Rob works with a team of talented marketing and digital people in the UK and across the world, aiming to build the world's most respected brand in recruitment and outsourcing. Rob's team is responsible for the internal and external communications of the group, as well as helping local markets build and run their own marketing strategies. It is this team that writes and publishes one of the world's most respected IT surveys, that which is being presented in this webinar today. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you. Yes, very pleased to be here.
Derek is a director of KPMG's CIO advisory practice, specializing in helping clients to deliver more effective IT through the use of outsourcing, hosted services, and cloud computing. In his near 30 years IT career, Derek has worked with a range of computing technologies and IT service delivery approaches. He's led an IT service delivery business for a major outsourcer and has also worked for a systems integrator and for leading consultancies. When it comes to cloud computing, he is a pragmatist rather than an evangelist. With a keen interest in the commercial and contractual aspects of cloud delivery and in the integration of cloud services with traditional IT services. Derek has led cloud computing projects with both public and private sector clients, delivering cloud computing business cases, risk assessments, technical architectures, procurement strategies, and vendor management processes. Welcome, Derek.
Hi, great to be here. Good morning, stroke afternoon, stroke evening, depending what time zone our attendees are in.
Good point.
Well, folks, we're all here. This is an exciting survey that I've followed for many years, and that's the reason why I invited Bob and Rob and Derek to come and be with us presenting their findings. So I'm really excited about this, and I hope so are you. So one of the first things I want to do is open up a poll question so we get an understanding of what it is that you all are thinking, and then the poll would be open for about a minute. And then, Rob, please take over your presentation. So give me just 1 second, folks. All right, the poll is open now. I'd really appreciate you all participating so we know what you're thinking. Where the question is about the role of the CIO. folks, I'm closing the poll now, and we're going to go back to our presentation, and I'm about to hand over control to you, Rob, so it's all yours.
Okay, great. All right, so let's get this working. Take over as presentation. Great stuff. Okay, so welcome. I'm Rob, and I'm a director at Harvey Nash Group. Because I'm also a CMO, I have a perspective on this both as a person who's intrinsically involved in sort of creating this survey as a piece of thought leadership, but also as a CMO, I also recognize I'm one of the painful people that CIOs often have to deal with, because it is often CMOs in organizations that are signing deals with Salesforce or cloud computing providers and not doing it in the right way for CIOs. So I've got a kind of double perspective on the survey. Harvey Nash Group, we're an international technology headhunting and IT outsourcing company. So we spend a huge amount of time with CIOs and tech leaders, and we're kind of there when things go really right. So if a company is looking to implement a major transformation strategy, we're there kind of helping set up what that might mean and the types of people they might want to recruit. But we're also there when things go wrong. So maybe a CEO is looking for a new CIO or looking to put in place a CDO to take on some of the things that perhaps they thought the original CIO or IT director weren't quite doing so well. So we've got this kind of very intimate and very detailed picture really from the ground about what drives CIOs and what makes CIOs successful. And we launched this survey really as part of that conversation so that we could get close to the CIO community and understand what sits underneath it. You'll notice that the survey this year, Harvey Nash and KPMG have called it the Transformational CIO, and there we have a chameleon, which we've named Kevin. And essentially, transformation means a couple of things here. Firstly, of course, CIOs are involved in transforming organizations. They are increasingly being used as a way of moving a company from one type of operation to another. But what we're also seeing is the CIO role itself is transforming, and it is radically different from where it was, say, even 5 or 10 years ago. So transformation means two things here. The chameleon analogy, although makes for a very beautiful image, there's a little bit which is wrong in it, because chameleons use the changing colors to disappear, and that's not something that successful CIOs do. They are very, very high profile, as we'll see later in this survey. So the survey itself, it's the world's largest report and study into IT leadership. We've got almost 4,000 participants across the world. I hope many people on this call have taken part. I implore you to take part in the survey when we release it in December this year, because there's a massive reason to take part. You get the report itself, as well as what's called a personal benchmark report that allows you to compare your results with other people's. And it represents $250 billion IT budget spend, which is actually the equivalent of a medium-sized country like New Zealand or Ireland or Switzerland. So it really is a kind of a massive insight into the CIO community. We've been running this survey for 20 years now. So 20 years ago, as many of you will have been in the industry, perhaps in kind of more junior positions 20 years ago in 1998, but a lot's changed. We've added 25% of the world's population, 1.5 billion. That was what the total world population was in 1900, 1.5 billion. So it just gives you a sense of how much our population has grown. Internet access has changed from being just over 3% to just over half of the world's population, which actually means that if you're an organization that is able to enhance and build and enable digital, you can reach over half of the world's population. And it's an amazing thought, but it's also a scary thought, because it means these are companies that know more about us than maybe even our own parents do. And on that very topic, the top companies in terms of valuation. In 1998, it was a mix. Microsoft was in there, but also some traditional companies. Now the top 6 of the top 10 companies and all of the top 3 are tech companies. The report itself, we're going to be covering some really basic information from the report, hopefully to kind of spur on some good Q&A at the end. But the report itself has got a huge amount of data in it, and so has the microsite, where we've got a data visualization tool where you can compare your results with other people, you can download results, you can visualize them. So hopefully after this webinar, we'll be sending Sebastian will be sending a link which will take you to that website, so you can actually investigate the report a little bit more. Okay, let's begin with, I'm going to be covering 5 points, and then Derek is going to deep dive into digital. So let's begin with the first one. IT investment is growing, and it is growing. I mean, what we're seeing is, and this chart shows the CIOs reporting budget increases in the last year. 49%, almost half, are reporting budget increases. That's the highest proportion that we have recorded in the last 13 years. So it shows you that a significant amount of money is being invested in technology. Not all of that budget actually sits within IT, and we'll touch a little bit later on what that means in terms of informal investment in IT. So parallel to this, we're also seeing that headcount is increasing. So similarly, the top line shows you the increase. So 47% are looking to increase headcount in the next year. Again, that's the highest that we've recorded since 2011. It's also worth noting that the decrease, so the blue line at the bottom of the chart, we've got the lowest number of people looking to decrease their headcount. So what's essentially saying is demand is going up and supply is going down, and it's creating a kind of a double hit in terms of problems, in terms of finding people. So when you combine those things together, the growth in budgets, the growth in headcount, it's been driven by a number of factors. What we're seeing, and no doubt many people on this call will experience it themselves, we're seeing investment in digital and cloud. That's continuing at a pace. But also this year, we're seeing a big investment in data privacy, governance, security. Boards are really concerned about these things. And there's just a general sense of confidence in the marketplace now. Maybe that might be different next year. I don't know. It depends on how the economy evolves. But certainly when we took the survey, there was a kind of a general sense of confidence in the market. And I think that has all combined to make for this what seems like a pretty positive environment. But let me just show you a slide that perhaps isn't quite as positive. This is the question that is about, is the role of the CIO becoming more or less strategic for your organization? And you can actually see that this year there's been a blip. It's been pretty static. It's been pretty upward right up until last year, and then this year we see it drop down. And there's a question. It could just be a blip. 1 year's data is not something to dwell on for too much. But could this be the beginning of what we saw in, say, 2006, as you see on the left-hand side of the graph, which was the beginning of that big downturn? Could it be that, or is it just simply a blip? What is certainly the case is that just because technology is becoming more important, it doesn't mean necessarily that the technology leader is as well. You know, we're seeing the incessant rise of shadow IT, the massive growth in job roles like the CDO, the Chief Digital Officer, and just the changing nature of technology have actually removed many of the certainties that fuel the CIO role. So you know, maybe we're being a little bit paranoid by picking out this as a blip, but sometimes it doesn't do harm to be a little bit paranoid. Second point, resourcing challenge. We're seeing, we mentioned earlier on in this presentation about how there's increasing investment, and we're also seeing this in the skills shortage. We're seeing this in many places. 65% of organizations say that a skills shortage is holding them back from their innovation plans. We're particularly seeing that in big data. So people are reporting major challenges in finding people who've got data and analytics and big data skills. Software developers still remain and will always seem to be the technology that people are after, but also enterprise architecture. I think some of the organizations are struggling with the challenge of fitting together these varied technology environments, and architects have become a growing need for organizations, and that hasn't been in the past. In the last few years, we've tracked it going downwards. The tactics that people are using to fill that skills gap, well, I mean, they're using contractors, as you'd kind of expect. Outsourcing, again, you'd expect that. What's interesting this year is actually 15% of organizations is using automation to a great extent to remove the need for headcount, and 48% of them are using it to some extent. So what we're beginning to see is automation being something that is removing the need for headcount. And I think that can only set to continue, because I think the skills shortage in technology is a perennial issue, and CIOs are probably in the very best position to understand what opportunities automation presents to them. If you look further down that chart, apprenticeships, cross-training, acquiring small company, these are all tactics that are less used, but often being experimented with by companies. What's interesting here is that actually outsourcing has gone down in terms of intent to outsource. That doesn't mean for a second that outsourcing is going out of fashion. It will still remain a major part of what people are doing. But what we've seen in the past is that when investment in technology has gone up, which we have tracked this year, outsourcing intent has usually gone up as well. So the graphs of outsourcing intent and investment have mapped and tracked one another quite closely. This is the first year that we've seen where investment has gone up, but outsourcing has gone down. And it's certainly the case that many CIOs that we talk to are kind of reassessing the balance of skills that they have. They're kind of looking on focusing on building innovation skills in-house. So these are the skills they want close to us. These are the data analytics, the business analysts, the architects, the software developers, those skills in-house. But they're also looking to outsource more in terms of more of the tactical skill sets. But what it seems here is that it's possible that the outsourcing intent is going down as people go, actually, I want to bring more things in-house because I wanted to use it to drive more innovation and more uniqueness for my organization. Point number 3, shadow IT. I mean, what we're seeing here, and I'll just explain this graph. We've tracked this year on year. We've asked how much of your CIO IT budget is controlled outside the IT department. And this graph shows you organizations that have more than 10% of their budget outside IT. And that goes up, as you can see, is going up very, very strongly. And of course, this is only what the CIO knows. By its very nature, IT budget that has not been authorized by the CIO, they probably don't know most of what's happening. So it is a growing trend. Of course, the oil in shadow IT's wheel has, of course, been cloud computing, and it's made anybody with a credit card, they can run their own IT system. It kind of starts with someone maybe in marketing, kind of like me. You build a simple customer form that is fairly safe and easy and no big deal, but bit by bit you add more to it, and the next thing you know, you've got a complex IT system capturing important data, often customer data, that's far from the watchful eye of the CIO. But shadow IT, and certainly this year, and Derek will pick up on this, but shadow IT has increasingly been seen as a positive thing, because actually there's a lot going for it. It empowers the business, it puts the responsibility in the right place, it enhances innovation, it can happen quickly, but of course there's a huge downside, and there have been, certainly in Europe, there have been many GDPR data privacy projects that have uncovered huge risk areas that have come from CMOs and other people building systems that have created a real risk. So getting that balance right between the governance but innovation seems to be one of the kind of the big battlegrounds for CIOs. On that very topic, trust, we talk a lot about security, and again this year we've seen security incursions up this year, and it's become as ever a big thing for the board. But we'll talk a little bit about trust. Cambridge Analytica has been something that has made a massive difference to people's view about where trust lies with data, and certainly GDPR in Europe has underlined that. It's worth saying that Facebook had $100 billion wiped off its market value as a result of this scandal, and that is the equivalent of the market capitalization of Nike, for instance. So it gives you some sense about how much trust is an issue. I did a excuse me, I did a search on Google about just my own history and my own kind of web surfing, and it kind of revealed, sadly, a very boring life. But this is where I've been in the last, I think, 3 months. And I guess what the slide shows is that it actually knew things about me that I'd forgotten myself, and it knew where I'd been and did this, and looking into the searches that I had done, it just knew stuff about me that I just didn't know. And it's scary how much these organizations know about you, and they know about you entirely legally. I've signed the privacy policy, but I think what it points to is that these organizations are beginning to piece together data from multiple sources, many of which you don't know are owned by the same organization. And I think what it shows is that despite everybody signing up to privacy agreements, organizations are increasingly going to have a duty of care to the people to whom they hold the data for, to ensure that they are doing it and looking after it in a professional manner. Whether it's legal or not is irrelevant. Even if it is legal, they need to care about their customers' data, and that will increasingly become a battleground in the future, and the CIO's role in making sure that happens is really key. It is therefore not surprising that the top growing concerns for boards, and these are the board of directors, including the CFO, cybersecurity risk has gone up by over a quarter. Managing operational risk, so in other words, data privacy, ensuring that the governance of the organization is correct, has gone up by 12%, and then a few other things. But it shows you that this is what these are the things that the boards are talking more about than they ever have before. Of course, one thing that certainly in the UK and in Europe people have talked about has been GDPR, and we asked a question about whether organizations were ready for it. Certainly at the time, only 15% said that they would be complete, and then 47% mostly complete. So, we're looking at 85% of people saying that they were not complete at the time. I'm sure that's gone up a little, but certainly the CIOs never be complete. What this all wraps up is that there's a changing role of the CIO. Even the name CIO is not static. Nothing is guaranteed in the future. We're seeing the rise of the CDO. So the Chief Digital Officer is a different perspective on technology, and many people see that the CDO is kind of the new boss of innovation, although we would argue that many CIOs perform the role of the CDO. So job titles are becoming much more fluid. Digital is becoming very, very important to the CIO. So tie that with the drive for innovation. The CIO, the person who's going to be delivering the value from technology, will be the one focusing on the customer and the customer experience and generating revenue there. And really, the person who can bring value in that area will be the one who has the most influence over technology. That could well be the CIO, but it all depends on what the skill of that CIO is and where they are facing and who they talk to. Of course, securing data and integrity, it's fine to be focusing on innovation, but without secure infrastructure, and without doing the things that CIOs do so well, it's really key. And as one CEO said to me, ultimately, I mean, I speak to CIOs all the time. They're always talking about innovation, but unless that CIO can talk cleverly and intelligently and authoritatively about the data and the security, I don't want to talk to them about innovation. They've first of all got to secure our infrastructure. And then the final factor is the business of running shadow IT. We're seeing that CIOs are beginning, the successful ones are beginning to have a new relationship with this and are actually actively encouraging it, but doing it within the proper governance framework to allow kind of innovation to happen, but not at the risk of securing data and integrity. As one CFO said to me when he talked about securing data integrity, it was referring to the 4% fine that companies might get if they run a mock of GDPR. He said, if I wrote a check for 4% of the company revenue, that'll be the last check I write for that company. So it does definitely focus people's attention. Okay, that's me. I will now pass presenting back to Cioindex.
Thank you so much, Rob. This was very insightful, very interesting. I'm going to now push the poll results so that we can discuss them for a little bit and see what everybody's thinking in terms of what the role of the CIO is. So give me just 1 second, folks. All right. Now I hope everybody can see it. What do you think, Rob and Derek? We've got about 15% thinking that nobody thinks the CIO as the blocking and tackling technology manager. Most people think the role is all three: do business, enable business strategy, drive it, and transform. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's Derek here. I would say for a start, there's no wrong answer. I think every organisation is different in terms of its position on its own maturity curve and the kind of business environment it's operating in. We've got people who are in the middle of going through massive mergers and acquisitions. We've got people who are relatively steady state. We work with some organisations that are in a managed decline as they exit a marketplace. And the role of the CIO, as Rob alluded to in his comments, is fluid. Has always been pretty fluid and probably will be pretty fluid going forward. I think it's encouraging to see the significant majority of people who recognise that actually there's a bit of a juggling act to be done by the CIO in terms of the focus on, yes, you have to know about technology, but you increasingly have to be hooked into both driving and enabling business strategy, and recognising that in order to do that, you need to be a credible business transformation leader. So I find that quite encouraging.
Yeah, so do I. I was just as a separate comment. What a tough role. I mean, you doing all of those things at the same time, and especially around the business transformation, because so much of the transformation comes from kind of innovation and finding new ways to work. So when you've got a CIO who is both ensuring governance in an organization and ensuring its security, and yet at the same time promoting what can seem sort of anti-governance, which innovation can sometimes be, it takes quite a special person to be able to handle both of those things, because they often bring, that's a wide skill set. But yeah, it's a tough role, but a very, very good role.
And this is also pretty consistent with the findings of the survey, right? I mean, that's basically where the CIO role is headed, would you say?
Yeah, I certainly agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's certainly, I think from Harvey Nash's perspective, when we hire CIOs, I think that the job title, we're beginning to almost do away with the job title and actually going to go, this is what we're expecting of you. And then you name the job title whatever you want after that. It's almost like the CIO has become everything and nothing at the same time, if you see what I mean.
Very interesting, very interesting. All right, folks, I'm going to push the second poll. It'll be open for a minute or so. Really appreciate you participating, so we can give Derek some direction as to what all you're thinking. So here's the poll. Please participate. Hey, Rob, you might want to mute your mic for a little bit, please. All right, folks, I think this is pretty much it. So I am going to close the poll, and Derek, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm just trying to get the slides back up, and if you can help me with that. Oh, here we go.
Coming up. There
Excellent.
you go.
There we go. Fantastic. Let's take that. Okay, so just before we get into this last dash to the finish line, this is going to be focused on digital, what that means to various people, how people are approaching it and where they're being successful and what that all means. I think it's really important as a piece of context to just make it absolutely clear that this is done in the full recognition of the fact that people do not live, apart from a few lucky souls, do not live in a pure play 100% digital world. There are an awful lot of older systems out there. One of the things Rob kicked off with was a look back to where we were 20 years ago as a planet and as a technology-enabled planet. I have a number of clients who are running systems that were built 20 years ago, and they will probably still be running them in 5 years' time. And they're an integral part of the client's business. So we do recognise that this is a complex landscape, and digital in most cases is an overlay on a complex and sometimes quite fragile landscape. So while we're talking about all the glitzy stuff, I don't want people thinking that this is with a lack of awareness of the foundations that are available to be built on and the somewhat parlous state of some of those occasionally. So the main things about digital for me, I think we're now at the stage with digital where we got to with cloud a few years ago. We don't all have exactly the same definition of what it really means, but we're sort of past caring. I think the direction of travel is pretty clear. It does mean slightly different things to different people, but it tends to have some common characteristics around actually external focus, customer focusing change through IT, rather than internally focusing change through IT. And the reason it actually matters is it's been around for long enough now that there are some people who have proven to be very good at it. And what we're seeing is a correlation between the people who are effective at using those digital technologies and actually driving higher revenue growth than their competitors in the same industry. And the average is around this 61%, which is a fairly significant number. And because we're seeing that across all industries, I think a statistician might argue that that's not necessarily causality, it might just be correlation. But I think we're stretching the boundaries a little. And one of the key examples for me is in manufacturing, which is a sector that doesn't spring to mind initially when you think about digital necessarily. That 61% number actually becomes 71%. So we are seeing this kind of fairly universally across a whole range of industries. And there are some common characteristics between the organizations that we think of as digital leaders, and by that we mean people who are kind of either regard themselves as being either very or extremely effective at using digital technologies. And what you see on the left-hand side, we have the kind of top 10 things for digital leaders, and on the right-hand side, we have the top 10 global average. And there are a number of similarities, but there are a couple of key differences as well. And starting with something which is strikingly similar is the second position is the same for both, which is delivering consistent, stable IT. And that actually is the operating license for the CIO. If you can't do that, you will not get the airtime of senior business leaders, you will not get the budget that you might need, you won't get the buy-in from the organization to rally behind you as you try to do more innovative digital type projects. Interestingly, on the digital leaders, the number one and number three areas are both outward looking areas. They're both looking at the customer and the customer's world and the customer's experience of dealing with the organization. On the global average, they're actually more internally focused and still struggling with business processes and struggling with increasing operational efficiencies. So those things are absolutely worthy. And as I said right at the start, a number of organizations are in different levels of their own maturity curve, and that's not a bad thing. We're not suggesting for a second that everybody should be charging down the digital route, because for a number of organisations that could be potentially a disaster. So people need to use their judgment to decide when to actually push the button and start moving more into the digital leader space. But there are some key characteristics around that and around the behaviour of those organisations. And what the digital leaders are doing really is they're seeing everything from the customer's perspective, and they're actually taking responsibility as IT leaders to drive that through the organisation. So they're spending as much time going to the organisation with interesting and innovative technical opportunities, but being able to position those not as pieces of technology, but as enablers of business change within the context of their own business, not in some generic airline magazine kind of world. Now, it's interesting, the poll question on digital strategies. One of the things we looked at last year was this growth of the proportion of organisations with enterprise-wide digital strategies, and we were relatively confidently forecasting it was going to be up to kind of 50% in 2018, and clearly we were wrong. What's actually happened is we've seen the number of organisations with enterprise-wide strategies actually drop. But interestingly, the reasoning behind that, it would appear that what's causing that is that more and more people are actually saying, actually, I don't need an enterprise-wide digital strategy, because actually trying to do it enterprise-wide is actually the antithesis of the whole point of doing digital. It's not nimble, it's not agile, it's not heavily localized to specific needs within my group or within my business. Do I need a global strategy when I can have a set of country strategies, and each country is moving at a slightly different pace? So the fact that the number of organizations with these enterprise-wide strategies is falling is by no means a bad thing. I think some people have kind of moved on from the I need a strategy in order to justify getting the budget, to the point of, I can actually just crack on and make some of these things happen in a more local and localized way. So generally, I think, as I say, digital in high-level summary, it is kind of a bit like being surrounded by a mist. It's pretty much everywhere you look. It's all over the business, it's all over the IT world, it's all over the customer world, and the customer expectation is heavily aligned to that. And you can't necessarily see where you're going to end up when you actually start off on your journey, but you kind of know that you've got to get going on this journey and basically see what happens as you go along. And stretching the analogy to pretty much breaking point, it can also be a little bit intimidating as you're wandering through it because of that. You're not quite sure what's around you, you're not quite sure where you're going to end up, you're not quite sure what you're going to stumble over along the way. But at the end of the day, I think we're seeing that a number of organisations now are driving those benefits through and overcoming those challenges. So one of the critical questions then is, what are the digital leaders actually doing? What's the kind of secret sauce to deliver a successful digital? Hi, am I back again?
Yes, you are. Yes.
I seem to have a little technical hiccup there, talking about digital and how wonderful and seamless it all is, and then the technology on me. So hopefully I've not been talking to a blank microphone for the last 15 minutes. So I was just moving on to the drivers behind a successful digital strategy and what the digital leaders are actually able to do. And basically they focus on three key areas. Firstly, it's the recognition that the strategy both starts and ends with the customer, that you actually need your own people behind you, so they need to be enabling it for you. And enabling is the key word. The final point is, it's not an enforcer that's layered on top of you. It's an enabler that helps you to do some of the things that you want to do. I'm just going to drill into each of these fairly quickly. So looking at the customer, there's some really interesting numbers here. So this is, again, comparing the digital leaders with the average. And a lot of this comes back to this ability to actually know your customer. So 53% of the digital leaders can actually measure profitability at the customer level, compared to about 18% of the rest. So you've got a kind of 2.5 to 1 ratio there. You can build on that. Digital is about building layers and then exploiting based on what you've learned so far, learning what to cast away because it's no longer necessary, and also learning what you can build on and in what direction to build in. And what the leaders are doing is they're actually then using that knowledge of the customer profile to enhance specific customer experiences. And this is very targeted spending, which is not people trying to transform the customer experience for 100% of the customers. This is much more about recognizing those customers excuse me, who drive profitable revenue for you, and then using digital to enhance their experience and increase your share of their wallet, increase their customer loyalty to you. And that's why the digital leaders are seeing this market-leading revenue growth, and it's profitable revenue growth as well. And again, there you've got a kind of roughly a 4-to-1 ratio. And then on the final point, once you understand the kinds of customers that you want and the kind of customers you don't want, you can then use digital technologies and digital approaches to actually attract the right kind of new customer. And the ratio here is more like 5-to-1. So you've then got people who are actually, once they get slightly ahead of their competition, they're able to accelerate further away faster because they have knowledge to build on. They've got a track record of projects that have given a positive return. So they basically get the finance community on board as well. And that's one of the critical parts of the CIO role increasingly, is that ability to be the person who brokers internally across a number of different internal functions, and isn't just looking for money for technology projects, but is looking for money for business change projects. Excuse me. That's the first facet. Secondly is this point about it really becoming real through people. And the key point here is the culture one. I work with a number of organisations who recognise that their culture is the biggest problem, and they really struggle with how to solve that. And you don't solve that through technology. So they want to be doing things in a more digital, agile, nimble way. And a challenge I'll often throw out to, particularly actually to the finance community, is when was the last time you celebrated a failure? Because one of the key things in the digital world is you need to be able to get comfortable with the idea of trying something that doesn't work, or maybe trying to do the same thing 3 different ways in the sure and certain knowledge that 2 of them will not be the best. And a lot of finance people are really uncomfortable with the concept of actually recognizing that failing fast is actually a good thing, because their heritage is large-scale IT transformation projects that take a year to plan, 3 years to execute, and 5 years to pay back after that. And this is a very different kind of world. So I think the people who recognize that you need to get that culture aligned, and that doesn't necessarily mean you need to turn the whole organization into an innovative digital mindset or culture, but it does mean that you need to understand where you can do that within certain parts of the organization and actually prove your point and then build on that. And that building on it is the second key point. The other people who really succeed are people who are very good at actually taking projects and scaling them. So recognizing, we've done something, it worked at a small scale, how do we then scale that up? And if you're good at doing that and taking the organization with you and turning that from a proof of concept into an enterprise-wide implementation, that's where you really become a proper enabler of change. So the ability to have that kind of innovative culture, make decisions quickly, don't stifle things with too much governance, but recognize that the real value comes when you can actually accelerate and roll out wider. And the governance point is the final thing here. In terms of this framework, as I say, this is not something where you set up a digital strategy and then you basically use it to force people to behave in a certain way. The key things really are around getting the governance model right, not swamping projects with too much governance. I've seen too many projects, and the IT as an organisation, the IT function, and we've got 20 years of survey data to back this up, has not significantly improved its ability to execute business change projects. It's a bit of a tragedy, but that's unfortunately true. The IT projects which are most likely to succeed in terms of landing on time and within budget and delivering what was promised are the ones which are all about technology change. So new storage architectures, server upgrades, laptop rollouts, anything like that, you've got a pretty high chance of success. If the closer you get to business change, the smaller that chance becomes. And some of that is because the projects actually get stifled by having effectively an agile project with a waterfall governance model on the top. So the governance model mandates that you must provide certain things which an agile approach wouldn't produce in the first place. And that causes all kinds of problems. So again, digital leaders are twice as likely to have the opportunity to use the right governance model compared to the rest of the organizations. And then the final point just loops back to what I talked about before, making sure that you understand we've got something that's running, it's either going to scale up or it's going to stop, and there is no third way. If it's providing value, then it goes up to scale. If it's really not, then we stop it with no regrets. We understand why it didn't work. We learn from that. We bake that learning into the next iteration, and we move on without any recriminations or blame being passed on to people. That's really hard to do in a lot of organisations. Let's not beat around the bush on that one. A lot of organisations are not comfortable with things that haven't worked unless somebody somewhere is getting blamed for it. So there is a longer term challenge in terms of culture here to actually get people happy with that kind of mindset and the opportunities that it brings once they can actually free their thinking up in that kind of way. So in terms of what that all means as we start to canter towards the end of the deck here, there's a few key things that people need to do. The IT leaders are tending to invest more in technology across the board in areas like cloud, where about half of them are investing in cloud compared to about a third of the rest of the pack. And roughly 1 in 5 of the digital leaders are already significantly investing in artificial intelligence, whereas on the global average, it's actually more like 1 in 20. So I think there's a challenge needs to be made about the use of emerging technology. We're not saying it's an answer that should be shoehorned into every organisation and in every situation, but actually understanding when and where is the right time to pounce on these technologies. And that will be different for everyone. There is no universal right answer on that. But then the other thing is more to do with the people rather than the technology. It's more to do with creating an environment where you can integrate a team with lots of colleagues from all over the organisation. As Rob mentioned in his part of the presentation, increasingly it's not IT that's spending money on technology. So you really need to get your arms around the wider organisation, understand what they're doing, and be a supportive partner and a critical friend for them. Again, not a blocker. You don't want an environment where non-IT departments feel that they have to secrete things away from IT because IT will come and stop them. What you need is an environment where they will go to IT and say, like, this is what we're going to do, unless you've got a good reason why we shouldn't, and can you help us do it? So I think, again, that comes back to culture, organisation, expectation on where people are allowed to spend their time, and the flexibility you can have around that. Now, clearly, as part of that, you need to create some safeguards on the way IT gets used, and this ties back to the earlier point where it is absolutely fundamental that you provide a robust IT service, because that is your operating licence to do the things that you actually want to do. And where that all takes you to actually is quite a potentially challenging space, which is the question of, does this mean that IT as a cost centre, to be deliberately provocative here, does this mean that IT as a cost centre actually can cease to exist? Because as technology moves more out into the business, this is more about digital transformation closer to the business need rather than centrally driven and pushed out. And the value doesn't come from the owning of that IT resource, it comes from delivering those outcomes. And if those outcomes are better delivered closer to the business, then surely that would be the place you go. The business functions themselves are having to break down their own silos because of the increasing focus on customer. So customer is key, and everything revolves around that, and that in turn produces internal challenges to some of the old functional silos. So you'd have to ask, as a CIO, are you going to be looking at how well you manage a budget, or are you going to be looking more at how you grow profit, revenue, how you increase customer satisfaction, how you improve cost to serve, how you grow share of wallet, etc.? And then the final piece of that puzzle is that you no longer think of shadow IT as shadow IT. It's just technology that's out there in the business. It's the kind of oxygen that allows the business to breathe in the digital world, and to perform at the speed that customers expect. So that might feel a little bit uncomfortable for some people. It might sound a bit sci-fi, depending where you are on your maturity curve and what the needs of your business are. As I said a couple of times, but just to make it absolutely clear, we're not advocating that everybody should be trundling down this path. There are different routes for different people, and depending what it is you need to do and the budget you've got to do it with. But I think one of the things we have shown through the survey data consistently across sectors and different sizes of organisations is that effective digital transformation does deliver really positive business growth. And that in turn produces a great opportunity to think about the the outcomes from technology in terms of what's the the business performance and customer satisfaction, rather than some of the more traditional ways of measuring IT performance. So that's where we're ending up. I think we've got time for are we going back to the poll and then some Q&A?
Shurab, I can't hear you on the speaker, so you may be muted. Derek, I mean, it sounds like I'm not sure if Shurab is able to, if we're able to hear him. But I'm wondering
Hey guys, can you hear me now?
Hey, yeah, we can.
Sorry. Folks, apologies. Go ahead, guys. Rob, take over, please.
I was going to just fill in for you there, but I was going to just say that, Derek, what's your sense of what you're seeing there and the results here? Most people are saying it's too early to tell.
Yeah, I think I'm not in the least bit surprised, to be honest. I think for a lot of people, this is a journey they're really just starting on, and we've got a couple of, as is often the case, we've got some leaders out there who've tried a few things. Some of them have worked, some of them have failed. We're seeing more and more kind of fast follower people tagging along behind them. And one of the things I'm seeing with a number of clients now, a lot of my clients now are far more comfortable having a discussion around things like machine learning and software robotics, and smart process automation, all of these kinds of things, which they're not actually running projects in that space. But even the people who are not yet running projects now want to have that conversation. And even 6 months ago, it was just too sci-fi and too futuristic and too risky for them. And I think they're starting to realise now that this is something that is going to become mainstream, and they really do need to start getting interested. So I've got clients who are doing projects in that space, who've already got robots running live in their own environments. I've got other clients who are just setting up their own internal innovation centres, and they're setting aside physical office space to encourage people just to wander over on a lunch break and just have a look at the kinds of things technology can do, play with some virtual reality headsets, this kind of thing. So people are at all different stages, but I do think the best is yet to come in this space. I think we're seeing through the survey, we have focused on digital leaders in the deliberate, conscious knowledge that they are leading. We're not looking at the pack at the moment. We are looking at the people at the front of the pack to work out how that value can be then replicated by other people. But I'm not in the least bit surprised that for most people, they do think it's too early to tell, and I think they're probably absolutely right in saying that.
The surprising thing to me is we don't have a digital strategy that's 12%. What do you guys think about that?
Do you want to pick that up, Rob? I'm more than happy to keep talking.
Well, I'll just say I'm surprised it wasn't. You obviously got a very connected audience, because it's actually higher than that. I was expecting it higher than that, but Derek.
Yeah, and again, I think there's two reasons behind this. In most cases, I think a lot of people are hoping to bypass the need to ever have one. There are people who've gone through the loop of producing beautifully crafted digital strategies, digital IT operating models. They've worked out all the funding and financing model, and they've worked out the accounting treatment of all of that. And they've spent an awful lot of time and effort building these beautiful strategies before they were allowed to go and execute them. And I think a number of people are hoping to bypass that completely and say, well, look, it's pretty obvious now that digital works. The customer demand is forcing us down this route. Whether we have a strategy or not, we are going to do something. So why don't we put our effort and our budget into the doing something rather than into producing a document that everybody's going to appreciate for about 15 minutes and then never look at ever again, frankly. So I'm not at all surprised if people don't have a strategy and probably don't ever want to have one.
Gotcha. That's a good way of looking at it. folks, at this point, we have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to start the Q&A. And we've got a bunch of questions, so I don't think we'll be able to hit all of them, but let me try. So from your perspective, Rob, what are the imperatives for the CIO to be in the driver's seat? And you too, Derek. I just wanted to pose this question asked, which is what should a CIO be doing?
It's a really good question. There's kind of lots of different answers to it. I think the first thing is that the CIO needs to they still need to be the technology expert, because when you look at all of the other job roles, CDOs or a CTO in a product-oriented company, they're all about innovation. They're all about driving customer value. So, and whilst the CIO is also about that now, you've got to then ask, well, what's the difference between a CIO and any other executive? So I think a CIO must be rooted in technology and be totally understanding and able to explain in-depth technical detail about the issues that their company's facing. But then once they're able to do that, then they actually need to be such a networker and be close to the CEO, close to the customer, and be kind of then focused around kind of uncovering innovation and building relationships. So there's two things: technical understanding and then relationship building that's focused around the customer.
Gotcha. Now, given the fact that the CIO is all of the above now, is IT as we know it going to survive?
That's a good one for Derek, I reckon.
What do you think, Derek?
Sorry, I'm losing you guys at the moment.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of interference from perhaps one from somewhere anyway.
Yeah. No, and I think in terms of the CIO thing, I'd be quite provocative, and I think I would say that one of the top priorities for a CIO right now is they need to be actually quite selfish. They need to look around the organisation and think, what am I going to do that's going to make me successful delivering this kind of space in this kind of organisation? And I think they need to be really realistic and focused on the things they can do to transform parts of the business that prove that they are capable of actually stepping up and doing that, and not being a provider of technology services, but being a leader who is going to actually help effect business change, so that your business leading colleagues in all of your other functions, you're going to be the go-to person for them when they realise that they're under pressure to either reduce costs, increase profit, increase volumes, reach new customers. The first person they ought to go and talk to should be the CIO. And the CIO needs to think quite selfishly, how do I get myself into that position? Because by doing that, you'll actually focus on the things that will deliver immediate benefit to the business, and build up your own knowledge and expertise of what those business requirements look like, which is knowledge and expertise you can then leverage to keep pursuing that agenda and pushing yourself forward within the business itself.
Gotcha. I think we're almost to the end. Does this also cover, is IT going to survive as is? What do you think, Derek?
Yeah, I would say absolutely, but it's always been changing. It always will change. It's so baked into everything that every organisation does now, and that trend is not going to diminish in any way at all. Whether it looks anything recognisable compared to IT today in 20 years' time, actually, I still think it will. I still think there will be a need for a lot of the robust, centralised, very well governed, very well managed, tightly locked down, properly secured, high performant, high availability, good traditional IT systems. I do not think that will go away. I think there will be a lot more in terms of percentage of technology. A lot more of it will be out in the business and will be closer to the customer. But I think if you were fast forwarded 20 years' time, a lot of stuff would still look the same.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, we're up. The time is up, and I really wanted to thank you, Rob and Derek, for this very interesting presentation. Thank you all for joining us. Oh, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great.
Absolutely. We hope you enjoyed and gained from this webinar. Your feedback is appreciated as we continually strive to improve upon what we deliver to our membership. You may send your feedback to our VP of events, Sonika. You've got her email. This webinar has been recorded. The recording will be available over the next few days on the events page on the CIO portal. The schedule of our 2019 webinars will also be available shortly. Thank you all once again, and have yourself a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks.